Hey there, welcome to Spectrum Pulse, where we talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today it's a big one. The newest project from Ethel Cain Willoughby Tucker, I'll Always Love You. I think as I've gotten older, my opinions on prequels have evolved. Not exactly gotten better or worse, but deepened. I've become less dependent on filling the blanks of the plot or conversations of plot armor, so much as they're a factor of emotional stakes. Less about the surprise or knowing that something is gonna happen, so much as how it gets there, what it means. The dread in the pit of your stomach knowing the coming end, even if the characters don't. And thus something like what Hayden Ahadonia proposed with her trilogy of albums going backwards in time from Preacher's Daughter. Well, insert my entire review of Perverts here, as it covers a lot of the discourse around her and the label situation that I'm not particularly interested in repeating, but truthfully, the gory end of Preacher's Daughter was never what had the most powerful resonance for me, in comparison with the slow build atmosphere and the tragedy of it all. So a project peeling into the circumstances behind taking that journey was probably going to pull me in. I should also mention the whole cancellation that occurred a couple weeks ago prior to this album's release for three main reasons. Number one, I'm not running defense for anything that she previously said, nor pulling off whoever hasn't sinned may cast the first stone. Whether someone forgives her in the context of engaging or liking her arc, that's a personal journey, not my business. Number two, the arc of an edgy teenager growing up in an evangelical pocket of the Deep South, especially given what she released before Preacher's Daughter. None of this should be surprising. It can be easily explained, if not excused. But also three, none of it was worth the outpouring of obviously astroturfed. Gee, an artist trying to get an exit away from Dr. Luke just so happens to have issues come up in her final album's release to get her away from him from accounts created a day before they start spilling tea. Haven't seen that before. Oh, and also the virulently transphobic harassment that she's received across multiple platforms, because so much of this, it was about stan culture nonsense and a reactionary sentiment that too many doing the canceling are too cowardly to interrogate inside themselves. Especially when Ethel Cain rounded on all of you with Perverts and your failure to engage seriously with experimental art until doing so scared you. I mean, some of us can critique the art, the person, and the backlash. I see you, I see through you, and so does she. Well, anyway, because we now coincidentally have an album all about exploring that environment that could have led to someone like Ethel Cain, how is Willoughby Tucker I'll Always Love You? Well, if Perverts was trying to deliberately drive away a lot of her pop fan base in a challenging swamp of ambient drone, this feels a bit like the middle ground between those textured, sprawling soundscapes and the slightly more focused singer-songwriter Americana of Preacher's Daughter. And while it's not better than either, it's more because its ambitions feel softer and more internalized, fleshing out the arc behind House of Nebraska and the characters that would inhabit this world. And I really want to start by drilling into lyrics and themes, because if you're looking for all of the psychosexual introspection or the high art transcendental musings or just the graphic violence that has colored her work previously, yeah, this is not explicitly that. Set in desiccated mid-80s small-town Alabama, the time period evident by some of the gauzy flutters of synth against the noisy rumble of guitars on the character exploration on Fuck Me Eyes, a highlight for me as the closest thing to an accessible pop structure on this album. It's set in Ethel Cain's troubled teenage years, where after the collapse of her childhood friendship with a Janie, she falls in love with one Willoughby Tucker, a star-crossed but ragged teenage romance that ultimately fails, leading to the tragic events that would occur across Preacher's Daughter. And while I can appreciate some of the irony that despite every pushback against pop she's made in her aesthetic, in thematic focus or even lyrical construction, this is probably her most melodramatically youthful album to date, that also does a disservice to the emotionality that underscores and drives a lot of this album. Call it less mature all you want. I've seen all too many adults that don't grasp what maturity is right now, let alone give empathy. So you get scenes like the sadness of Janie. It's best encompassed in the moment when your platonic childhood friend gets more interested in a romantic partner than you, and the numbing, watery twang. And Fuck Fuck Me Eyes is an intentionally blurry sketch of the rough teenage bad girl who might steal every crush's attention or affection. Ethel Cain has flat out said that most of what denigrates this girl is an outright lie. Vicious rumors spread about the girl who has found some sexual liberation, maybe even some power, the whore to the pure girl's Madonna. But even if it was all true, the reality of the loneliness of that hard life allows this nugget of empathy to be found. It's really affecting. And then there's Willoughby Tucker himself, who has his own abusive father with trauma from Vietnam, who demands he adhere to a specific brand of machismo, which on the surface he can perform and enrapture the teenage Ethel Cain, but that's just it. It's performance. It's surface projection. And thus we reach the thematic roots of this entangled generational trauma, and where the wide-angle framing does everyone credit. Ethel Cain's infatuation with the idealized version of Willoughby is sharply juxtaposed with how she sees herself, given her own preacher's father's abuse of her, and how she's internalized herself as damaged, where the failure of any relationship must be inevitable. To quote her on Nettles as the pedal steel and fiddle trace the ragged fantasies, "To love me is to suffer me." So she imagines scenes where he is gravely wounded, but her love can save him, and it's the same sort of projection. They've got nothing in this moment but each other, and the tragedy is the underlying insecurity that neither are in a time nor place to fully unpack beyond fragments and her own fears that he would abandon her, that girl, for the fuck me eyes. But Willoughby is just as consumed by fear, which plays across the implications of the haunted acoustics of a knock at the door. From his father and a family legacy he can't quite escape, fear of the material reality of supporting them both when they've got nothing in small town Alabama, but also a fear that he's not nearly as strong or traditionally masculine as Ethel Cain believes that he is. Neither are equipped to fix each other at this stage of their lives, even if they probably had the shared experiences to find common ground if they could communicate it, but they can't. So he slips into drug abuse and addiction because he doesn't fear death or oblivion so much as he fears the weather, the ineffable that can't be controlled. And that accentuates the self-destructive spiral, and by the point of the penultimate song, Tempest, as the electric guitar growl gets increasingly loud and ponderous with touches of a tornado as the synth wails, he blows up at Ethel Cain's glamour of him for the reality of his depressed and suicidal implosion, which is why he eventually leaves her behind. Now, the album ends with the sprawling, damn near cinematic Waco, Texas, which outside of Fuck Me Eyes is probably my favorite cut here, and a fantastic closer as the wistful churn of guitars and pedal steel make full use of that ghostly sprawl, as she then parallels the doomsday cult Branch Davidians for a doomed relationship. Yeah, it's melodramatic, but what do you expect from a teenage love affair? And it demystifies a lot of the story behind A House in Nebraska for the dire escapist fantasy that it was, shoddily rebuilt in her mind in a haze of wistfulness and alcohol abuse. I mean, see patterns repeating. She blames herself for not being able to fix him, even if she knows she never could. She tolerated a rule to do whatever you like, even as it saw both of them spiraling, leading to a sad stagnation and implosion where she still blames herself. Time might forgive her, she should forgive herself, but she can't for her own mistakes, and it would take gory tragedy for her to finally do so. And thus it then deepens the tragedy of Preacher's daughter because she never did stop believing, like the echo of Journey on American Teenager. The lessons learned here should have been enough to keep her away from worse men, but not even memories are immortal, and cycles of generational trauma don't heal easily. And it's just so achingly sad, not just because of the cruel tragedy that could or should have been avoided, but because on a broader scale, the roots of this run much deeper. They feel more universal, emotionally true for both young men and women. But all this does come down to the execution and the point where this album will make or break for audiences. For 10 songs on an album running 73 minutes with 3 ambient interludes, your patience for the lethargic sprawl of these songs will be a tougher sell, especially when there's a lot less melodic payoff. I mean, I love the pianos that trickle into the guitar-driven slowcore shuttle of Willoughby's theme, a stunning slow crescendo, but the interlude is considerably less compelling, probably the weakest song on the album, and Radio Towers feels like it might have better fit on Perverts. Moreover, as much as I can appreciate the space of these tracks to accentuate the languid space of the time period, the isolation, the loneliness, the tragic weight of a loss that can feel like the world when you're that young, there is something that gets lost when it feels like as early as Nettles, the character's knowledge of their own fate across time feels kind of stretched and thin. Not so much diminishing the stakes, but leaving me seeking more dimensions to add complicating weight to more of these scenes. Now, to be clear, this is not me saying that it has to make some grand statement about the American South or that generation, where I've seen some critics utterly miss the point on confusing the scale of the sound for some sort of grander thematic idea. Compared to Preacher's Daughter, this feels way more intimate in its scope, but when the same notes get hit with that intimacy, I'm not sure she makes the most of the length of these tracks, especially given intriguing dynamics set up and then abandoned for drilling ever deeper into the House of Nebraska, even if I love how she ultimately landed the story. It feels a step away from the utter transcendence of her absolute best, and she set up a lot that she could have gotten there more often. And that has me more conflicted on this than I wanted to be. It's less a prequel to Preacher's Daughter, more of a midquel for the lore, where she seems acutely aware of what she needed to satisfy her record contract and get away from Dr. Luke, but not exactly pay off any sense of expectation, leaving the audience wanting more. Some have described it as more of a B-sides project, and I wish I didn't hear that, especially as once you process the emotional resonance, I hear a lot of loose threads dangling ever longer, leaves you wanting more. And as such, I hear why some folks find this a little cynical or even calculated. Leverage just enough depth over a long enough period of time, that'll hook them, unless it's more transitional. But I also hear a real emotional core that leads to some powerful moments, and it's got a couple of her best songs to date. Like the Dust Bowl, it might all blow away too fast before we get into some of the weirder shit I can tell she really wants to explore. But for an intriguing time capsule and set of character portraits, it is achingly emotional and nuanced, and it's not going to get enough credit for that. And hell, on that alone, I'd argue it's worth a recommendation. For what this is, I think I can forgive. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you want to see more, please be sure to like, share, drop comments, subscribe. Yeah, this was a bit of a lot. Honestly, went a little longer than I was expecting, but again, I think there is some levels of emotional nuance that need to be untangled. I just kind of wish that once you set up so much of the setting, you do a little bit more with the people that you brought in beyond that core relationship, which is good, but again, we have a house in Nebraska, and while it is deep and effectively, better usage of her time, I think, could have helped. But beyond that, if you have your comments, leave them down there below. Anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, I'm all ears. And hey, if you all want to get involved in helping support the channel, argue with me on my Discord, or hell, just get albums onto my schedule, link to my Patreon and YouTube memberships is right over there. Once again, don't feel obligated. Tough times out there, I understand, but the option's available. Till then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.